Greetings, everyone. I'm excited to welcome Alexis Normand, CEO and co-founder at Greenlee. Alexi, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Ben. Nice to see you.
Yeah, great to have you here. And let's dive right in. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I'm French. I live in Paris, but I have a bit of an international background. I lived in the States as a kid. My dad was a diplomat in South Africa, studied in France, business, all those things, political science, philosophy at La Sorbonne. And so I've always been interested, from a family of civil servants in public affairs, right? And I didn't know I was going to be an entrepreneur, but I started my job in consulting, but in Dubai on public policy stuff. And one thing led to another. So overall, I spent about a third of my life outside of France. So I have a bit of an international background to try and give a short answer.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So let's talk about Greenlee. Now, have you had startups before? Is this your first entrepreneurial experience?
No, I really started in tech, about basically 10, 13 years ago or so. So after this consulting job and working in a big manufacturing company, I was super interested in the future of health. I was actually planning on writing a science fiction about this. And so I wanted to get into the mindset of somebody who'd like track all his health metrics to live to be, 150 or something. But this was back in 10. And so I was a very early adopter of Fitbits before it was even connected to a phone. And I got really into this digital health stuff, which led me to essentially meet the founders of a French company called Withing, which makes IoT for digital health. So Fitbit like watches, but also Wi-Fi scales and so on and so forth. So they hired me because I was writing a short science fiction novella about the topic. So I guess I'm a storyteller in a sense. And I spent 5 years there. And I built a B2B business. This led me to lead their Boston office and work with health systems in the US. And we got acquired by Nokia. And then I left, and then I helped another startup get started in this space. And we went through Techstars, all this in Boston and New York. So I had my first, not exactly a failure, but attempt at launching a company before Greenlee, to answer your question.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, appreciate that background. Yeah, really interesting journey. So yeah, let's talk about Greenlee. What products and or services does Greenlee offer?
Yeah. So with this quantified self background, basically, I thought, okay, let's launch, something to quantify your carbon. So the premise is and was, how do we make something totally invisible, but at the same time, which is crucially important, our carbon footprint, how do we make that visible so people change their behavior? Kind of like, carbon is the new calorie, so to speak. So in our early days, we did an app for individual carbon tracking, but quickly we understood that the real need, the real market, the real impact would be with SMBs. So we started building this SaaS platform, which essentially helps an SMB, a mid-market, and now larger companies track their footprint. And I think you have to think about it as, what was the world before we got started and what does it look like now? I think it used to be that only very large enterprises would commit to, net zero, build internal expertise, hire consultants, put a lot of budget, and they do this with spreadsheets and PowerPoints and all this stuff. But now actually the world has changed. Emissions tracking has gone mainstream. You have the Paris Agreement for climate change that have like set trajectories for every country. Regulations are kicking in. People are feeling the pressure from every side, sales to avoid being locked out of procurement. People from their investors are asking some funds and so on. So the world has changed. It's going mainstream, and it means you need new tools. Essentially, being able to automate a lot of the data collection, that's the biggest pain point when you do your carbon footprint, but also making the analytic available to many more people, your employees, your ecosystem, having a platform that's not a silo, but that's really something collaborative with your suppliers. And of course, what people come from is they want their GHG report. So that's what we sell, a platform that accelerates the production of a, regulatory compliant GHG report, but it's so much more. It's also the strategy, the reduction pathway, the footprint of your product, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so interesting because we know like enterprise companies, those global large companies, the awareness, right? Maybe they were maybe proactive, I don't know, but now it sounds like it's pushing down to mid-market and SMB. And do you think this will be someday where just like companies have credit scores, people have credit scores that they'll just ask for your like carbon credit scores, just like, hey, if they want to do business with you, do you think it'll be very mainstream at some point?
So, the future is already there. It's just unevenly spread out.
Yeah.
The way carbon accounting works, right, is you have what you call direct emission, so-called scope one. So it's whatever emissions is coming out of my car, my machine, my factory, right? You have indirect emissions from electricity, scope two. So I consume a lot of energy. There's a power plant somewhere that's emitting, especially if it's cold power versus, solar or something. And then you have scope three. So scope three is everything else. So it's essentially your supply chain, what you buy. So you have this trickle down effect when Apple says they want to hit net zero, or Microsoft, well, basically these guys have 25,000 suppliers. So they can't hit their objective on scope three if they don't trickle down their objective. So Apple will force its Chinese suppliers to go with renewable energy to reduce their own footprint. And so this is the trickle down effect. And so when you're an Apple and you're committing to this low carbon pathway, you're actually asking your biggest suppliers in terms of what they contribute to your footprint to commit themselves. And so how do you, and to actually answer your question, how do you do this? Well, you have to rate them. So you rate them on their current carbon intensity. So let's say I'm a car manufacturer and I'm buying steel. So a ton of steel is about 5 tons of CO2 on average. But then you've got some guys who are 10 tons of CO2 because it's all the energy used to produce it will use coal power or stuff like that. And you have some guys that are 2 tons of CO2. So it's a massive thing, right? So if you're this company buying steel, you have to rate those suppliers on the intensity. You can do the same thing with your energy provider. You can do the same thing with your cloud provider. You can actually do this with any of your providers, which is one thing Greenlee does, by the way. But you can also rate the trajectory. So, okay, yes, I'm at 10 ton of CO2 per ton of steel today, but I'm the only guy providing the kind of steel that you need, because it's particularly robust and you need it to build bikes, or aluminum or whatever. So what really matters to you is not where I am today, but where I'll be in 5 years, because I'm doing all these investments, in my production process and my electricity, and it's going to go from 10 ton of CO2, a ton of aluminum, let's say, to 5 or to 2. And their own supplier engagement and so on and so forth. So we provide a score. Today, we've scored about 10,000 companies. We've also looked at public information that's available, publicly disclosed, which has allowed us to score an extra 10,000 on slightly less reliable data. So we've already scored 25,000 companies. It's not mainstream. There are millions of companies out there. We've got like super strategic suppliers to, manufacturing companies. So yes, it's happening. And to your question, I think it'll be generalized sooner than you think.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's fascinating, but I can see how complex, how challenging the process is. So what year did you found Greenlee?
Yeah, so we started it end of 2019. After my return from Boston to Paris, I followed my wife back to Paris. We launched this app, and then COVID immediately hit. So we had fun, to be honest, and then but the refoundation was our pivot basically in summer 2020 when we went all in on B2B.
Okay. All in the big B. Okay. And then your company is located in Paris then?
Yeah, so we've got about 180 employees today. I would say there are about 100 in Paris or so. We've got about 10 to 15 people in the US, but we've got more of these guys in Paris working for US customers. We've got 10, 15 people in the UK, and there are people all over. We've got people in Mexico and Argentina where, we were founded during COVID. So we've made the workplace pretty flexible, I would say.
Yep, very common with the concentration in Paris. That's great. And so 180 team size. Anything you want to share around revenue ranges, ARR ranges?
Yeah, so I usually don't like to, but we have talked to journalists about this before. So we're around or slightly above 10 million AR,
Okay.
basically.
Okay. Well, great. Yeah. Nice size now, hitting that kind of some type magical threshold 10 and to the next one. So it seems like, so for your prospects, the companies that you target, it seems like this is a pretty big pool of prospects. So tell us a little bit about your go-to-market motion. Do you have an ICP that you're after, an ideal customer profile that you're after right now?
Yeah. So our ICP is essentially somebody who's got a pain point, which is he needs to track his carbon footprint in the relative short term. Usually because a customer of his is asking. So if I'm in the US, I may be a supplier to the US Army or to Walmart or to one of those companies that expect this above a certain threshold. And I'm actually this mid-market company. I'm in charge of, ESG or compliance, but maybe carbon wasn't such a big focus for me before because I wasn't feeling all that pressure. And then suddenly it comes or maybe it's my European, mother company or my investor because I'm part of some impact fund, So I'm getting this pressure and sometimes from all sides at once. And I thought I needed to, pay 50K or 100K to a consultant. And then suddenly I discovered that I can do this for a fraction of the price, maybe a tenth of all that or a quarter, depending on your complexity, using a platform where I can learn to be autonomous and build in-house capacity. And I'll have actually better quality data at the end because it's plugged in to my IT systems, to my financial systems. You're a CFO, right? So we connect to ERP to get the data. So I have a big pain point, but I don't have the budget for a large consulting company. I don't have the time to like go all in on this on my own. And I'm afraid, that it's going to be super complex. So I'm looking for this intuitive and precise solution. And of course, this didn't exist before us. And there aren't that many platforms focused on the mid market. So we answer this precise pain point.
Okay. Yeah. That makes a ton of sense. Now, switching to the fundraising side, how much capital have you raised to date?
Well, recently in dollars, 52 million, right? But we had raised prior to this about 25. So like 22 in a Series A, and then back in the days, so to speak, 3 million from business angels and so on.
Okay. Okay. So, and that the 52 million most recently looked like a Series B. And so a decent amount of capital raised. So tell us, let's maybe focus on the Series B. What led you to that raise? Were there triggers or milestones that said we're ready for another raise?
Yeah, so we've had very strong growth. Okay, we so we were about at 10 million, but the year before we were around 4 to 5, and then the year before when we did our Series A, we were at 1 million. So we it was a 10x in 2 years basically. So the growth is there. If you think emissions management has not gone mainstream, you're wrong. It's there. I mean, with maybe a little bit more thrust in Europe, but it's there in the US as well, for sure. We've got about 400 customers in the US. So when you start to see the $10 million or euro milestone, well, suddenly you become eligible to Series B or growth funds. And we are also in a category which is carbon accounting, whereas you have some enterprise platforms which have raised 100 million and so on. So we have been scrutinized by a lot of VCs over the year. So all we really needed to do is start reaching out again and to say, listen, we think we have something that works here. and putting in more capital can allow us to really reach our goal of, going from, it's money, but it's also we're managing 50 million tons of CO2 today, and we'd like to manage a billion, because let's not forget the mission here.
And so, I talked to a lot of founders who are looking to raise a Series A. They've raised a Series A. And any fundraising lessons or advice that you'd have for founders who have raised that Series A, they're progressing and now looking at that Series B round. Any thoughts on what you maybe wish you had known from that Series A to Series B round?
Well, for sure, it was much more difficult to raise a Series B than a Series A, perhaps because of the environment. And you see a lot of funds who pretend to have money and or are just looking around or not really interested. So that's one, but that's not really the issue. The issue is the valuation is much higher. So I think legitimately they're asking tougher questions, right? Uh, so I think Series A, we showed we had cracked the growth model, so to speak, we could sell. But Series B, you have to show that you can actually be, especially in this market, that you can grow, but also that you can grow to a point where you'll be profitable. So um, I, I, I did not realize how metrics focused the investors would be at the start of the process around things that are maybe very mundane to say now, but things like your net retention, your LTV to CAC, the cost of acquisition, your challenge. So we weren't looked at as a climate tech. We were looked at as any SaaS platform, and are we hitting those metrics? And I think having a very clear view on what those expected metrics are for a Series B is, well, you learn this talking to investors, but knowing maybe a little more in advance, you can come prepared for all these Q&As.
Yeah, no, that's great perspective. Definitely, you hear Series A, you've got to have some metrics in place, but it seems like Series B, yeah, they're expecting much more sophistication there. So I appreciate.
And I have a fantastic COO who's actually a former investment banker. Her name is Laetitia, which of course was ready for that kind of conversation, whereas perhaps I was less so.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great to have that help on the team. And so, Alexia, at the current state of your business, grown past 10 million ARR, do you have a favorite number or metrics that you're focused on to guide the business?
So one metric is, of course, our impact, because and I'm not saying this, just to feel good. We are part of our competitiveness is the mission that inspires a lot of the people working with me, and so they're in it for, like, the cause. There are different levels of sensitivities to climate change, but in our organization, it's extremely high. You have people who. So what we drive to, we don't look just at AR. We looked at how much carbon are we managing, how much will we manage, but so that's from 50 million today to hopefully a billion. Just as a people are not expert on this. There are about 50 billions of tons of CO2 equivalent being released in the atmosphere every year. So a billion is a big number. It's 1/50th of this. So that's our mission to Mars, so to speak, and maybe we'll do more on the financial side of things. We have a business plan that leads us to profitability. In maybe we had a business plan to lead us to profitability this year without the fundraise. So we know exactly what to do, but with the growth, it's profitability in 3 years. Or we decide that it makes sense to raise again because, growth is preferable to pure profitability.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. And then, Alexia, really appreciate your time today. And as we wrap up, what's coming up next for Greenlee?
Well, lots of things. So we let's just say there's the product and there's the expansion. So on the product, we do those GHG reports for companies, but more and more companies are looking for basically a one-stop shop for other needs that they have. So more and more companies are looking at product carbon footprint. So think about Apple; they have their, you have the footprint of the iPhone and the company. So that's a new feature essentially, which we've put. A new product is an academy So people can get certified on Greenlee to become experts in carbon accounting themselves on climate change. And third is something around regulatory compliance for CSRD. I don't know if everybody's familiar with it, but it's this sweeping regulation in Europe that hits any company above 500 employees next year and 250 the year after. And it concerns 5,000 US companies, right, who have operation. So that's on the product side. On the business expansion side, we're of course going to put a lot more energy into serving our US customers because it's booming in the US for the same reasons that it's booming elsewhere. And the UK, European expansion, especially the Nordic.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds exciting. A lot more to come from Greenlee. So, Alexi, really appreciate your time sharing your experience with the SaaS community. If listeners would like to learn more about Greenlee, where should we send them online?
Well, of course, they can visit, our website, so 3 W's.greenlee, Greenly.earth, like Mother Earth. But they can also write me an email, Alexis, Alexis, at greenlee.earth.
Oh, perfect. So if you'd like to learn more about Greenlee, check out greenlee.earth or just email Alexi directly at Alexis at greenlee.earth. And Alexi, really appreciate your time today.
Well, great talking to you today, Ben.